Hello and welcome back to Weekly Market Recap. I'm with Rich.
Hello, everyone.
And I'm Knight. Let's get to it. So this past week, we saw the market up 1.09%, brings us up year to date 20.05%. Really, the difference between what's going on in the rest of the world and the market is pretty palpable at this time, with obviously a lot of hecticness and craziness going on in Afghanistan. And yet the market has in many ways shaken it off and continued to perform really strongly throughout this week. Now, we do have a little bit of update on the Delta variant, where we are. And then the main reason why the market did so well, a lot of it comes from Friday and what the Fed was saying, specifically Jerome Powell. But if we go into looking at the market, what we see is throughout the beginning of the week, pretty sharp spike, strong performance. And then on Thursday, when we started getting some worse news about Afghanistan, we did start to see the downturn. Now, this is when the bombings were going off at the airport. And so we did see some market shakeup. But then Friday, specifically when Jerome Powell started speaking, we just see this massive rise. This is right around when he was speaking in the morning. And then we continued on to all-time highs in the S&P 500. But Rich, let's talk a little bit about what's going on in Afghanistan.
Yes, well, I've been approximately 10,000 people a day. We've had a warning yesterday morning concerning Americans not to go to the airport, that there was a credible threat, and then it occurred. We had 12 soldiers initially killed. Now it's up to 13, many wounded, and 60 or more Afghan killed and hundreds wounded. So it's a real disaster in human lives that have been taken. But for an economic view with the United States, we're still pulling out. Biden is not changing any of his plans around what's happened with Afghanistan. He's still planning on pulling out by the 31st of August. That's basically saying, yes, it's a tragedy that people died, but the effect on the economy and hence the market is relatively small.
Yeah, at least as of right now, the market isn't pricing in any further action after being pulled out. But I think this obviously has the potential of being something more serious, specifically around the weapons and everything that now the Taliban has access to that the US actually supplied. And if anything, what we saw from Thursday was the Taliban currently doesn't even have control, and what happens with ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and if there are other extremist groups, even more extreme than the Taliban, would that cause further action? Now, as of right now, I don't think that the market is planning on anything like that, but that would be a big shock and start to create some fear, uncertainty, and doubt within the market. So we will quickly also want to look at the Delta variant, which, in some ways is the lesser news. But if we look, we are still currently rising every day, but we do seem to be rising at a slower pace, which means we're hopefully getting closer to the peak. Now, we obviously don't know. This could accelerate, it could decelerate. But when we look at these numbers, it's partly why there's so much worry about where we are, because we've blown past the downtrend that we were having, and we're getting almost close to the worst days that we had seen. Now, if we jump to deaths, it is interesting to note that we still have a lot higher distance between deaths than we do new cases. Now, part of that is because some of these breakthrough cases that we are seeing, so people who are vaccinated and still end up getting the Delta variant, those are usually much milder cases. Now, the last thing that really affected the market this past week was Jerome Powell and the Fed and coming out. And partly what happened, if we jump back to the S&P 500 data, we saw on Thursday the market start to sell off. Now, a lot of that did have to do with Afghanistan and the fear that was going on there. But the other part was we started to have different Fed members coming out and saying, well, we think we might need to taper sooner. We're talking about raising interest rates. We're afraid of where inflation is. We're happy with how the labor market's performing, and we want to start talking about tapering sooner. Jerome Powell, with his opening statement, basically alleviated all those fears, by saying we need to be patient, and there's a lot more harm that can be done by acting too quickly rather than being patient. Now, what's interesting is that he's been consistent this whole time, but clearly the market was starting to price in a tapering and talking about raising interest rates a lot sooner. Now, I thought the most interesting thing that Jerome Powell said was when they enact policy, there is usually a lag that happens. So if they were going to taper their purchases, it's not like the economy immediately starts to feel that pressure. It's normally months or sometimes even, half a year down the line that the economy starts feeling all that pressure if they're taking money out of the system or adding to it. Now, what he said, inflation right now, we're seeing it at 5%, which is really high. But what happens if we're just seeing the worst part right now, and then in a few months, it starts to trend downwards? And then while it's trending downwards, now the market starts to feel all the tightening that the Fed policy started to put in. That would be a lose-lose situation where now we're not experiencing the high runaway inflation that we were fearing, back in July, August, right now, that 5.5% high inflation. And we actually just put a whole clamp down on the economy being able to recover and grow. Now, that was really interesting and not something that I hear a lot of people talk about, the fact that the Fed policy decisions actually do have a lag on when we really start to feel them. Now, the other thing that was interesting that Jerome Powell said was just around if we start to see the same pattern as lumber, that in used cars and trucks and then travel, what we saw was these prices spike and then they start to come down rapidly. That would almost be an anchor on inflation. So even if we start to see rising prices in food, gasoline, other areas, if used cars and trucks are minus 5% or trending down in prices, it's going to drag down the rest of CPI data just in the same way as for the last 3-4 months, it's been pulling it up significantly. So that's another reason why Powell was saying we really need to be more patient than less right now, really understand what's going on and act decisively when we have enough information to make those decisions. Either way, the market absolutely loved it. Basically, the story was we're going to have lower rates and more money for longer. Yippee. And we did see the market come to an all-time high. But the justification for why they're having those thoughts, I think is really helpful. And it set us up for September 22nd to have a very lively debate within the Fed. All the governors are going to be talking about tapering, when to start. And that is Jerome Powell's job. It's not necessarily to make the decisions, but it's to help facilitate the conversation. And I think he's more than willing to do that. So it will be an interesting next couple months. We obviously have CPI data coming out in the next couple weeks, jobs data coming out in the next couple weeks. And if those are really blowout reports, I could see us tapering quickly. If we're lagging or within that range, I could see us pushing it off. Yeah, well, we appreciate you all for tuning in. As always, like and subscribe, share this video with anyone who it would help. And we're here to support you. Your money's here to support you. We'll see you again next week.